3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history podcast from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, we are marking 5 years of doing this show, which started in March of 2020, a very normal time in America and the world. And here we are at another very normal time. Nicole, here as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there and happy 5 years of this day.
Hello there. 5 years. I remember us hiding out in our closets and recording the first few episodes.
And look at how far we've come. I'm still in a closet. You're in a hotel.
I know. I know. I'll never forget. I mean, I can never forget this day because the day my daughter was born, March 12th of 2020 is like the day the world shut down. So 5 years to me always feels pretty special. But
Yeah. And look, we're doing this as part of our Some Sunday Context series, which are these Sunday conversations where we're trying to connect history to the present. And we're also doing this on YouTube. So shout out to everyone watching on YouTube. This is also a little bit of a celebration. You know, we don't have to run through too many of the stats and so forth, but we've done 755 episodes. We've done every year since 1776. We've done at least one episode and hit a few even before then. I think the last time I checked, I haven't run the stats in like 6 months or so, but definitely the 60s is the most covered decade. We've changed the name of the show once. That was not that long ago. We have this exact same music, and we get emails from time to time, and got a few as I put a call out for any questions and comments around the 5th anniversary. People ask about the music all the time. So our theme music is by Teen Days, this guy in Vancouver who writes great music. Shout out to him. And you can actually download the theme song on our website, thisdaypod.com. So go check that out if you want the theme song. We're also looking forward. There's a lot more on the way. I think people have heard us talk about next year, a big year-long initiative we're going to do around 2026 and the America's 250th birthday. And today I thought what we could do is do something that I think flows into that a little bit, but I wanted to just talk with you about what I see as some of the big lessons and themes we've learned about American history and see how they feel like they connect to now and then heading into the 250th next year. And I'll just say, I think I've said this on the show before, but to me, my relationship to this show has changed in the last year or so, in that at first I really loved, and I think the kind of strength of the show was this sort of jumping around, and we would just like be in one year and then be in another year, and we would dive into a story, and often a little small one, often an esoteric one, and we would just spend some time in it and then we'd dip out and move on. And you two are historians, so you've probably owned this all along, but I will confess that only in the last year or so have I kind of been able to just have a little bit of like, own a little bit of like, okay, I think I see some patterns here, you know, and it's that whole like, we were collecting dots for a long time, and now I see how those dots connect. And so I'm in that.
The newsletter has been helped.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, and I'm an amateur at this history stuff, and so it's taken me a while to kind of come around to this, but I want to own that a little bit more. I have found it to be a very sort of satisfying phase in my experience doing this show with the two of you. And it's a big part of what I think I'm excited about for this year, when I think we need some of that perspective, and then next year when it's like America's going to be telling itself a story about itself as it hits 250, and I kind of feel like we have some insight to offer now. And so, well, what do you want to do? You want to run through some of these sort of basic themes, and none of this will be a huge surprise, but these are some things that we've learned. So we're going to do 5 themes for 5 years, and these are 5 things that have jumped out to me across the many stories we've done. So the first one. People are petty.
You don't say.
A lot of times when you're examining a historical moment, it is a very fruitful first question to ask, which is who has beef with who? You know, who's annoyed? Who has backstory? Who's in a bad headspace? Sometimes it's even like, you guys know I'm obsessed with this, but what was the weather like that day? Was someone running on low sleep? Was it really hot? You know, like but that little texture of people's interpersonal relationships just defines these massive events over and over and over, I've found. So
I think that's so important because we do tend to go straight toward ideology or like end goals for why people are doing something. But if you've ever met people, you know that they're not really driven as much by those things as much as they are by like, that bitch eating crackers again.
Or to me, I feel like it's the petty stuff that really doesn't matter. You know, I feel like all of that sort of plays into how we perceive people and what we want to blow up to make big or whatever.
Yeah.
But I like knowing that people in the past were just as petty as we are, because like it's easy to like mark it down to like social media and like our little grievances and annoyances being part of something that's wrong with us today. But it's something that's always been wrong with us.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think I have to confess something to the two of you. By accident and not of my own volition. I watched about 15 minutes of Hamilton for the
I
first
thought you
time.
said you've never
broke
seen
the
it.
seal.
You
For
the first time
prided
in my life.
yourself
I've
on
never seen
watching.
it. No,
It's about beef.
my daughter was very interested in watching it, and so it got put on a movie night. And mostly, it's just not for me. I just couldn't take it. I left the room. But I will say, in the little bit that I picked up, it does a very good job of that. The small beef, the texture, the way that people are just annoyed with each other for decades. And so I will give it.
Yeah, and there's nothing like the genre of hip hop to play a beef,
right?
No, I did,
and some
I will,
pettiness.
I will say, and then my praise of Hamilton was. I don't know why I don't have this vendetta against Hamilton, but it's just every time I've brushed up against it, it just has not clicked for me. But I will say obviously the deep hip hop knowledge there was incredible. Just like you pick up, even in the 15 minutes I listened, I was like, oh, that line's taken from this line's taken from that. Yeah, so yes, it is a great. You're right. Hip hop is the perfect way to kind of play out those beefs. So we'll move on to the next theme, but I also want us to sort of keep a log as we go of which ones feel like they're useful for this moment right now. And I will say, as dire as the consequences of these beefs are that we're living in right now, like we've never maybe had a collection of pettier people in charge than this
Beef
moment right now.
petty officer Donald Trump.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, how central vengeance is to his
Oh my
administration
God.
is remarkable.
All right,
I mean, even what's going on in Colombia is all about petty.
yeah, you're right. All right, what's our next big theme? Theme number 2.
Our next big theme is a history full of near disasters. There's so many episodes we did where the world could have ended, y'all. The world could have ended. Our many presidents could have been assassinated. There's so many attempts when we talked about the atomic bomb or not the atomic bomb. It was armed and it fell.
The plane in North Carolina?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, wait, what? We could be that close to being on the brink of nuclear disaster? It just boggles the mind. And then I can't even recall how many near presidential assassinations we've had. At least a handful. I think
Everyone got shot
really,
at some point.
Really, everyone's got shot at some point. And I think it just shows how violent America is. We are always sort of on the razor's edge of some sort of catastrophe. And also somehow we find a way to bring it back. Those episodes have always just sort of like even got me a little chills just thinking about what might have been, what could have been.
Yeah.
Historians study contingency. And I think those are the moments where you're like, okay, like if one thing tips the other way, suddenly you are in a nightmare scenario.
The missile crisis, it's no joke.
I find those moments absolutely fascinating because there's a little bit of like there but for the grace of God, but it's also just like we are on a razor's edge quite a lot.
Yeah. So is there is there any part of you that's like comforted or contextualized by that? Does it put the disasters that do happen in a little more context, that they are actually not that big of outliers given how many so near misses there have been? Maybe.
I mean, I find them interesting because they scratch the creative part of my brain, but I don't know that I find them comforting.
I don't know.
Even as I was saying it, I didn't find myself comforted.
I'm not comforted by the fact that we are not that many steps away from people making bad decisions. Actually, maybe one step away from a person making a bad decision. And sometimes it's not even a bad decision. It's just a mistake or carelessness or things that happen. And I never know what to make of that. You would hope that people would be a little bit more careful when things like this almost happen, but people never really are. We forget and we move on.
I also feel like we're living in a quarter century where we keep losing the coin toss. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like things have not fallen in a good direction since Bush v. Gore.
And certainly, I mean, obviously, even among all the scary disasters, there's like different levels. This country has survived assassinations and even wars, but we've done an episode about being one button away from the US and the Soviet Union sending nuclear missiles at each other. That's a whole nother level. So it's important to keep in mind when we say near disaster, that can mean a number of different things.
Yeah.
Well, and by near disaster, we also mean there were mechanisms in place that acted as safeguards and snapped in. And at a moment when the safeguards are all being taken away, I feel less comforted.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Let's move on to our next one. Our next theme
Which is also not uplifting.
No, I know. A lot of these are not uplifting, folks.
Which is fine. That's a history is not not a bedtime story.
No, it's not. It's a nightmare.
One big theme that comes through again and again is this idea of backlash. That for every story of progress that we have to tell, a victory for greater inclusion, for more freedom, what happens very quickly after is a story of backlash. And it's kind of incredible that personal liberties and sort of like citizenship and rights have grown as much as they have over the course of US history, given how persistent and how sustained backlash is in American history. This is something that I think a lot about today, because one of the things that I've learned from this show is how brief those windows of opportunity are for what I think of as progressive and positive change. Obviously, one that we go back to again and again is Reconstruction.
Yeah.
And how breathtaking it is that you have this moment where you can legitimately call it the United States' second founding, that we rewrote the social and political contract, that millions of people were freed from enslavement and were granted citizenship and were granted the right to vote. And there was an opportunity to rebuild the United States in a much more liberty-driven way. And that window slammed shut so fast. And then you take both good and bad from that, right? Like so much was accomplished in just a few years.
Yeah.
And you only got a few years.
Yeah, that was it. And in some cases, not even a few years. I mean, it was that swift and that fast. You can never rest on your laurels. You know, like when you get these victories, you think everyone pats themselves on the back and it's kind of like, all right, we're good. And it's like, no, you hold and you hold and you hold, because you cannot sort of relinquish that victory because it can be snatched away at any moment. And we are absolutely seeing that.
Yeah. The other, we've talked about this on the show a little bit before, but the kind of other thing I just am puzzling through is how asymmetrical sometimes this can be. And so your moments of progress, or your little inches towards progress, are often met with a backlash that feels at least much, much, much bigger. It's not 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it's 1 step forward, 3 steps back, you know, which means you're going backwards if you do the math. But, you know, it's not just kind of, oh, it swings in one direction, swings in the other. The backlash is the right word. It's an active sort of hard push in the other direction. And this is, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, you know, when you're gaining rights, you maybe don't know what you have in front of you. And then the people who feel like rights are being taken away from them, which I generally think is not the case. It's not a zero-sum game in this country. But the people who feel like rights are being taken away from them because they have felt there's a sense of loss there. That's where I think a lot of that sort of really overreaction in the backlash comes from. So it's just this kind of like when you're coming at rights from 2 different directions, it leads to this asymmetrical.
But also people who are driving backlash are the ones who have the most social and political and economic power.
But it's because they feel it, right, but they feel it slipping away.
Yeah.
Right. But then they have the resources to fight back in a way that folks who are trying to scrape for new rights don't have access to those things.
Right. Yeah. But obviously a huge, I mean, probably the defining element, I think, in our politics and culture right now is backlash. And I think that's going to be a huge part of when we look to next year. I think that's going to be one of the big defining stories that we tell. Any other thoughts?
But here's the positive thing that I just want to say very quickly, which is the thing that it has made me think is that we got to be ready.
Yeah.
That window is going to open. And so we have to be ready for when it does. And I think that there's something really useful about that, because it encourages all of us to think about what is the world you want to live in and how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
All right. Theme number 4, perhaps not surprising, but one that just keeps jumping out at me over and over. Guess what? Americans really don't want to pay their taxes. Over and over and over. So many stories feel like they come down to just basically that, from the Whiskey Rebellion and sort of a lot of the sort of early revolutionary fervor to, like domestic terrorism. A lot of that comes down to that. So I don't know how much more I have to say other than just Americans don't want to pay their taxes, other than, even that kind of framing of it's you paying your taxes as opposed to you funding the government for things that generally people want. When you ask them, do you want your government to do this? Most people say yes. Most people like a sort of robust government that offers social services and so forth. But we've just conceived of it in this country in a way that makes people feel like, someone is coming and taking something from me. And part of that, I will say, is nuts and bolts, like just the actual way we pay taxes. I mean, people joke about this all the time, but it's like the government comes to you and it's like, I know how much you owe me, but you have to guess.
And if you get it wrong,
and if you get it wrong, then you're going to be in trouble. It's like, can you just tell me the number?
Real.
No.
No.
It's like,
That's
so
real.
I just think the whole dynamic of how we pay our taxes just colors this idea of what taxes are for and why people.
So much anxiety.
Yeah, people don't want to pay taxes, but at the same time, people feel deeply entitled to certain services. I mean, just a few weeks ago when we talked about paying for toilets, like the use of a public restroom, it's like, I'm not paying to use the restroom. That's just the irony of it for me, is like, how can you be demanding and yet so unwilling to pay for the things that you want?
I will throw out one little thing that I gleaned from recently reading Manisha Sinha's The Rise and Fall of the Second American Republic, which is about Reconstruction and its aftermath. She talks about how freed people who were living in the South, I can't remember quite the location, but there was a bill passed to get rid of taxation, and they rebelled against it. They protested against it because they were like, no, we want to be taxed. We want to pay taxes because those taxes create the schools that we are desperate to send our children to. We want to be able to pay the teachers, tax us. She called it perhaps the only pro-tax revolt in U.S. history.
Wow.
That's fascinating.
Wow. That is.
Maybe we should do that next.
I know. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Our final one, 5 lessons for 5 years. What is our final one?
That is that we are constantly fighting the Civil War. We are constantly reframing the Civil War. We are constantly contesting the Civil War. The Civil War has never ended. This is a conversation I had with Wright Thompson in New York, where he was like, all of this shows me the South won. We are constantly in these battles about who won, who lost, who gets to shape the narrative. Yeah, who gets to shape how these stories are told. The statues that come out of this, the murals, the art, the relic, the textbooks are highly contested. And I think that's just because the Civil War implies that the stakes are so high. The way that we think about liberty and freedom and democracy and even our own economy, the stakes are so high that we have not settled this issue yet. Far from it.
Yeah.
It really does feel like the animating fight in the United States ever since. I mean, it was the animating fight before the Civil War. It was the animating fight during the Civil War, and it continues to be the animating fight. And even though, as we mentioned earlier, you have those Reconstruction amendments that do fundamentally rewrite the contract.
Yeah.
Those get contested immediately. We are still fighting over the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest fights that's happening right now in U.S. legal circles is what should the 14th Amendment mean? And that contestation that is happening right now between conservative jurists and non-conservative jurists is about the Civil War and what the Civil War meant and what it settled and what it didn't settle.
Yeah. It just makes me think, do you think that the people who were living in the 1860s would have thought 150 years from now, this won't be settled? 150 years from now, we will still be debating and actively trying to dismantle or reconstruct like these ideas.
Yeah.
I don't know that Robert E. Lee would think 150 years later, people would still be fighting to keep his statue alive.
But at the same time, and this is another kind of big meta thing I feel like I've learned, but people actively fight to write history in real time, right?
Absolutely.
So maybe they didn't say, okay, 150 years from now, this will be unsettled. But there was, we've done episodes on the bloody shirt fight. Immediately after the war, there was kind of like deriding of people who were telling one story of the Civil War and trying to replace it with another. If you're not doing that, I guess your question is, are you doing that just because of your goals in the moment, or are you doing that to leave a legacy and write a history? I don't know.
I will also say that the other thing that I think about in this fight over the meaning of the Civil War, if the original sin of the United States was slavery, the original sin of this second founding was not holding people accountable.
Yes.
And we are living with the consequences of that problem, that mistake, that error, that decision.
There's been no consequences. There's been no accountability. And there's been no sustainable reparation. And I don't mean like reparations like pay us for slavery. I mean, well, that. But there's been no
but more
reparative work to sort of heal the parts that have been broken. Do you know what I mean? Like there has not, even in the efforts that were to sort of like address some of that harm, has not lasted.
Well, that's another big theme, is this country just really likes to keep it moving, and doesn't like to stop.
No looking back.
Which at times,
no regrets.
Which at times, and there's a part of me that does buy the argument that is a part of sort of whatever you want to call it, American exceptionalism, or what makes this country special at times, is that it does have that amnesia. I mean, Niki, you talked a minute ago about how like when things swing back, things can swing really fast, and you get these windows where you can make a lot of progress. And maybe that has a little to do with the fact that we don't stop down and go into paralysis. I don't know. But yes, it is remarkable how much we just don't convene and talk. And to this point, kind of settle on a collective story, and that leaves just a vacuum for everyone to fight over it. So, okay, those are our 5 themes. As we said, not the sunniest. I want to throw in one bonus. Always, there are lots of animal stories that are wonderful throughout American history. It's important to point that out. We love weird animal stories. We have a whole section on our YouTube page of all of our animal stories collected. But yes, animals play a big part in American history.
We sure do. That's right. Love our pets.
Our pets. We do. Our squirrels that are invading our White House lawn.
And we hate rats.
And we hate rats.
Rodents in general are not getting a good showing on this show.
We will hunt a bear, but then also turn it into a cute stuffed doll that will turn into our nickname. Yeah. We love our animals. We would throw beavers out of airplanes with parachutes.
With little goggles and parachutes.
I don't know if they were wearing goggles, Niki.
You know what, Jody? We don't have to be that stuck on the historical record.
Fair enough. All right. Happy 5th to the two of you. Happy 5th to everyone listening. We really appreciate all your support over the years. And of course, we have lots more great stories coming up for year 6 and beyond. So, Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie. Oh, wait, before I do this, someone wrote in and asked, how did you come up with your little sign-offs? And they were like, I always play along when I say, Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always. And you say, thank you, Jody. And then Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you. And you say, my pleasure. Anyway, we've gotten a couple emails over the years about how we fell into that.
It was just very natural. Like, Kellie didn't want to repeat the thing that I said. And so said something
people
different.
always say, thanks so much for having me. And so I wanted to mix it up. So no one says my pleasure, but it is my pleasure, guys.
I love it. Yeah.
And I
That's
will
your
say
signature move.
Once every 70 episodes, my brain will just freeze as I'm doing it. It's the same every time, and I'll just seize up and just say the wrong thing or switch up the order. And when I do
then nobody can speak because we're like, but that's not how we do it.
Anyway.
Oh man.
All right. Bye guys. Happy Sunday.
Bye.
Bye.